There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Exodus. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. So for the last few weeks, we've gone over all these beautiful things made for God's tabernacle, including the tabernacle itself, along with all the beautiful garments made for the priests of God. And today, we're going to begin by talking about those who made those beautiful things. And we see two men set apart by God and who have been shown to Moses. The first one, Bezalel, who is the grandson of Hur from the tribe of Judah, and then Aholiab from the tribe of Dan. And so these two men, they're picked from over 2 million people. And the reason they're picked, I believe, is not because they're the most skilled men in Israel, because I'm sure there is other just as skilled men in Israel. But if skill was the only criteria, the list would have been probably in the thousands. But I believe it's because of their hearts. It's because what we see here is that these men who make beautiful things, it always involves their hearts. And it's like what we see in verse 6, where God says, He put wisdom in the hearts of the gifted artisans. So it's not just in their minds, or it's not just in their intellects, but it's in their hearts. And that's because the men God chooses, He already has their hearts. So He's able to put wisdom in them. And so these men, they were supernaturally gifted by God, because even though this work was physical, it was a spiritual work that they were doing. And so it was dependent on His Holy Spirit. And there's something that we see about people with God-given gifts, is that when they express their soul and their hearts, their gifts are used either to express the spirit of the world or the spirit of God. And we see this all the time. We see it in music, we see it in art, we see it in architecture and literature, where we see the expression of men's hearts or souls, and it can be either worldly or godly, depending on the spirit that's behind it. And I believe each of us are created with these gifts and talents by God, and that they've been given to us to be used by God for His purposes. And it's in the allowing of letting God use us for His purposes through our lives and our talents where we can express His wisdom. And so it's like we talked about last week. The way you do this is by dedicating our whole life to Him. And it's like that burnt offering being fully given to God with no reservations, where you allow God to use your life to create these beautiful things that you would have never been able to create on your own. And they're all beautiful, and it's all for God's glory, and it's all done by His wisdom. And why it would be natural for God to use these two men, I believe it was because it was natural for them to be able to listen to God, because their will to be able to please God, because we don't see them here taking any vows or taking any opportunity to glorify themselves or trying to just express themselves in their work. So I don't think they use their faces or the faces of their children for the cherubim. But I think it's what it says in verse 11, that God trusts them. As He said to Moses, He says, all I commanded you, they shall do. And so you see, this seems like too big of a job for just two men. And that God, you would think that He would have spread this work over many more people. But the right men in God's hand, God can do a great work. And we've seen this time and time again in the church. We saw this with Chuck Smith. Many ministries came out of this one man. And it was because of his humility, where God could use the man to accomplish a lot. And we see it a lot with the Wesley brothers, with Charles and John. And then we also saw it in the life of Martin Luther, who began all these great revivals. Or even these guys, they even wrote the hymns in those revivals, because God's work is always bigger than the person he uses to accomplish it. But God only uses people who are willing to do his work and not their own. Because I don't believe that he does the mix and match thing, where it's partly God and it's partly you. And that's because God says that he will not share his glory with another. But God, he will partner with us. But when he partners with us, he's always the head. And it's always around his plan, where he allows us to go along with him. And so he'll only use people with no selfish ambitions, who will serve him without promoting themselves. And we see this all over the New Testament, and we see this in the qualities of what God looks for the leaders in his church. And we know that all this work of the tabernacle and the establishing of the priesthood, that this work will be completed in these 11 months where they're at Mount Sinai. And that's not a lot of time for such a big project. So after appointing these men for this work, God returns to the subject of the Sabbath. And he's telling them that he's really serious about the Sabbath, and he's really serious about them taking this rest. And so God gives them a warning that even with this big work that's to be accomplished here, you're not to put it above the Sabbath to complete it. And then, there's that saying where things can still be changed, and how people always say, well, it's not written in stone. Well, these 10 commandments that were given to Moses, they were written in stone, and they can't be changed. They're all written by God. And on these 2 tablets, it wasn't like there was like 5 commandments written on one tablet and 5 on the other, or 6 and 4. All 10 commandments were written on both tablets, and they were also written on both sides of this tablets, because this was like a written contract. So each party was supposed to receive a copy. And then we get to chapter 32, and now we get a view of the camp while Moses is away on his mountain retreat. And you have to remember that Aaron and Hur, they were both left in charge of the camp by Moses. And so now you got to kind of imagine the people here. They're looking up at the mountain every day, and they're just watching and waiting to see if Moses would come walking out of the cloud and come down the path. But he never comes, and it's been over a month. And nobody has expected him to be gone this long, because it's never taken this long when he's went up to the mountain before. And then you hear, by the sound of this urgency of God telling Moses, go get down to go see what the people had done, you get the idea that this event had to have been close to the end of that 40-day period. And so for the people down there, it seems like they're waiting for nothing, because this doesn't seem to be a reasonable amount of time. And you're all waiting for this Moses so that you can all get out of here, because you all want to get on to that land that you were promised. And all of these people, they've all seen the power of God. They've even heard his voice, and they've even been terrified to the point where they thought they would die. And so what they're thinking, well, what if Moses offended God up there? What if he rebelled against God up there on that mountain, and now he's dead? And so now all the people, they go to Aaron and they say, oh, well, what are we going to do? Moses is dead. He's got to be dead. It's been over 30 days. It's almost 40 days. And we can't live on this mountain forever. We got to go. Make gods to go before us so we can get out of here. And so they quickly desert Moses. And in the Hebrew, when it says, as for this fellow Moses, and that's the way it says it in the New International Version, They're deliberately casting Moses in this unfavorable light, as if he wasn't God's instrument and that he was just another coarse man and not a man of God. And so you kind of wonder here. You say, well, how long did it take Aaron to cave? How long did it take him to agree with the people? And did Aaron himself, did he really believe that his brother was dead? Because the thing is, they had no reason to believe that Moses was dead. God had not been unfaithful to them for the 40 days. God, on a daily ration, was providing the manna for everybody every day. They hadn't gone without water. And they're also ignoring everything that God had personally instructed them and had forgotten, where God had gently and carefully cared for them as their own child, leading them with a pillar of cloud and fire. So there was no good reason for Israel to desert Moses or God, and there was no good reason for Aaron to take things into his own hands. And what we need to see here is that having delays in life are not good reasons to take things into our own hands when we're waiting for God. But I'm afraid that we see that all too often. I see that all too often. And it's when we think that God hasn't brought us what we wanted. And when you start thinking, well, I've waited long enough. And so you take it into your own hands, where you say, well, I was waiting for God, but it was too long, so I did something about it. And so these people, they're like us. But what we need to see here is that God is not in any hurry. And we too, like them, we need to be patient, because that's their problem. Their problem is impatience, which causes them to act impulsively. And you can apply this to almost anything in our lives when waiting for God to do something, like if you're leaving a job or you're making a move, or while waiting for God to bring you that Christian husband or Christian wife. We've all seen this, where people desert God and then they make bad choices. And if we don't see it in our own lives, we've seen it in the lives of other people. But here, these people, they're purposely ignoring everything Moses had ever taught them. And this feeling of impatience, it did not begin with Aaron, but Aaron was the one who's been put in charge, and he is supposed to lead them. But he was not supposed to lead them by popular opinion. And that's what he does. And he knows better, because it's been made very clear to Aaron from the very beginning that Moses was to be like God to him, and that Aaron was to be his prophet, which means he was only supposed to do the things that Moses had instructed. But now here, Aaron, he's leading, but he's not following God or Moses, and he's not following God's laws that they've been given, but he's leading by following the will of the people. And so now what's going on is that what has begun in the spirit, these people are now going to try to accomplish in the flesh. And it's just the way it says it in Galatians 3:3. So now they're going to try to make themselves their own God and to finish the work that the real God who had delivered them had begun. You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.